The problem with these people is they don't belong here. The woman snapped her words, slicing through the cabin air. Passengers stared down at their phones, pretending not to hear. Only one person moved, a small girl in a yellow sweater, her braids clinking softly as she stood. "That's not true," Zuri Johnson said, her voice trembling but clear. "Everyone belongs." The businesswoman blinked, startled by the courage in that tiny voice. She didn't know the pilot listening from the cockpit wasn't just any pilot, he was the airline's CEO, and in a few moments he'd leave his seat to make sure justice took flight. Her father, Marcus, reaches for her arm. Too late. Zuri stands, all 311 of her shoulders squared beneath her bright yellow sweater, her braided hair adorned with colorful beads that click softly as she steps into the aisle. "My grandma taught me that when someone is being mean, staying quiet is the same as helping them be mean." She announces, her voice clear and steady, despite its childish pitch. "And nobody on this plane should help meanness fly." The businesswoman's mouth falls open. The elderly woman's eyes widen, and in the cockpit, alerted by the flight attendant's hurried call. Captain Richard Whitaker, CEO of Meridian Airlines, and today's pilot, due to a last-minute staff shortage, makes a decision that will change everyone on Flight 237 forever. If you're enjoying this story so far, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more powerful narratives that examine our shared humanity. Now let's rewind to understand how Zuri Johnson found herself at 38,000 FT, about to teach adults a lesson in courage they would never forget. Marcus Johnson checks his watch for the third time in 5 minutes. The morning sun streams through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Chicago O'Hare's Terminal 3, casting long shadows across the gleaming floor. His daughter Zuri stands beside him, her pink backpack adorned with astronaut patches and mathematical equations, a reflection of her twin passions. "Daddy, will Grandma remember me?" Zuri asks, her voice small but curious. "It's been 2 years, 3 months, and 12 days. Marcus smiles down at his daughter, constantly amazed by her precise mind. "Of course she'll remember you, sunshine. You're pretty unforgettable." He tugs gently at one of her braids, making her giggle. "And she FaceTimes with us every Sunday." Zuri nods, seemingly satisfied, but her eyes remain thoughtful behind her purple-framed glasses. But seeing someone through a screen isn't the same as remembering how they are in real life. Like how I couldn't remember exactly how Mom smelled until I found her old sweater last year. Marcus feels the familiar tightening in his chest at the mention of Amara, gone 4 years now, after a brief, brutal battle with pancreatic cancer. He crouches down, meeting his daughter's eyes. "That's why this trip is so important. You'll make brand new memories with Grandma in San Francisco. Real ones, not screen ones. And you'll make your big presentation, and your boss will finally see how smart you are." Zuri adds, repeating the words she's heard him mumble while practicing in front of the bathroom mirror at 5:00 a.m. "That's the plan," Marcus says, straightening up and adjusting his tie, as a mid-level executive at a financial technology firm. This presentation to potential West Coast investors represents his first real chance at advancement since putting his career on a slower track after Amara's death. "Now what's our flight number again?" Flight 237 departing at 8:45 a.m., arriving in San Francisco at approximately 11:23 a.m. Local time accounting for the 2-hour time difference and average tailwinds for this route in April. Zuri recites, then frowns. "Though I think we're boarding late. It's already 8:17 and they usually start boarding 40 minutes before departure for a plane of this size." Marcus glances at the departure board, impressed and slightly unnerved by his daughter's detailed knowledge. "You're right, sunshine. Let me check with the gate agent." As Marcus approaches the counter, Zuri remains by their carry-on luggage, her attention caught by the diverse tapestry of humanity flowing through the terminal. An elderly couple sharing a cinnamon roll. The woman carefully wiping crumbs from her husband's sweater. A teenager with green hair FaceTiming, loudly gesturing with pierced hands. A harried mother trying to corral 3 small children while balancing a tray of coffee cups. And then, someone different. A woman in her 70s perhaps, with delicate features and silver-streaked black hair pulled into a neat bun. She wears a pale blue pantsuit and sits perfectly upright in her wheelchair, hands folded in her lap, a weathered leather satchel balanced on her knees. What catches Zuri's attention isn't the woman's stillness amid the terminal chaos, but her eyes alert, observant, and somehow sad. The woman notices Zuri's gaze and offers a small smile. Zuri never shy waves. "Are you going to San Francisco too?" Zuri asks, stepping slightly closer but careful to stay by her father's luggage as instructed. The woman nods. "Yes, going home, after visiting my son in Chicago." Her English is accented but clear. "We're visiting my grandma." Zuri volunteers. She lives in San Francisco because that's where she moved after she retired from being a professor of astrophysics at Northwestern University, which is where my mum went to school and met my dad, who was studying finance, not stars. The woman's smile deepens at Zuri's run-on sentence. "You must be excited to see your grandmother." "I am. But I'm also nervous because what if she expects me to still be 6 years old, which is how old I was last time we visited in person? I'm much different now that I'm 8. 8 is very different from 6. The woman agrees solemnly. But grandmothers understand these things. My grandchildren grow and change too, but my love for them never changes. Marcus returns looking slightly concerned. There's some issue with the original pilot. They're bringing in a replacement, but will be boarding soon. He notices Yuri chatting with the elderly woman and extends his hand. "Hello, I'm Marcus Johnson. I see you've met my daughter, Minjai Park." The woman introduces herself with a slight bow of her head. "Your daughter is delightful." "Are you also on Flight 237? We are." Marcus confirms headed to San Francisco for business and family. Minjai nods. Perhaps we will be seated near each other. As if summoned by their conversation, the gate agent's voice comes over the PA system. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay. We're pleased to announce that Captain Richard Whitaker will be piloting today's flight to San Francisco. We'll begin boarding Flight 237 in approximately 5 minutes, starting with our passengers needing special assistance." A murmur runs through the waiting area. A businessman in an expensive suit mutters to his colleague, Richard Whitaker. "The CEO of Meridian Airlines is flying the plane." "Must be a PR stunt," his colleague replies. "Remember when he was on that reality show about bosses working frontline jobs in their own companies? Undercover CEO or something? Yeah, but that was years ago. Thought he'd be too busy counting his millions to fly commercial routes these days." Zuri, overhearing this exchange, tugs at her father's sleeve. "Daddy, is it unusual for the CEO to be the pilot?" Marcus, who has been checking his presentation notes on his tablet, looks up distractedly. "Very unusual, sunshine. Like if the principal of your school decided to teach your class for a day. Ms. Greenfield did that last month when Mrs. Rodriguez had her baby early," Zuri points out. "Well, yes, but Marcus is interrupted by another announcement calling for passengers needing special assistance. Look, they're starting to board. Miss Park, that would be you, right?" Minjai nods, but a frown crosses her face as she looks around. "My nephew was supposed to help me board, but he had to take an urgent call." She glances at her watch, concern evident. "We can help you," Zuri offers, immediately looking up at her father for confirmation. Marcus hesitates only briefly before nodding. "Of course, we'd be happy to assist you to the gate at least." Minji's expression softens with gratitude. "You are very kind." "Thank you." Marcus helps navigate Minji's wheelchair toward the boarding lane. A sharp voice cuts through the ambient terminal noise. "Excuse me, that is not your group." A woman in her mid-40s, dressed in a charcoal business suit with a silk scarf knotted precisely at her throat, steps forward, blocking their path. Her blonde hair is pulled back in a severe ponytail, and her narrowed eyes fix accusingly on Marcus. "We're just helping Miss Park to board," Marcus explains calmly. Her nephew had to step away. The woman her name tag identifies her as Diana Hargrove, VP of Operations for Nexus Financial, purses her lips. "There are airline staff for that. You're holding up the proper boarding procedure." Before Marcus can respond, Zuri speaks up. "My dad says helping people is never improper." Diana's gaze drops to Zuri, seeming to notice her for the first time. Something flickers across her face. Surprise, perhaps? Or discomfort? "Well," she says, her tone shifting to one adults often use with children. artificially sweet and condescending. That's a nice sentiment, but there are rules for a reason. Minjai speaks quietly from her wheelchair. The young man is merely being kind. There is no need for concern. Diana's attention snaps back to Minjai, her expression cooling. I'm sure there isn't, but efficiency matters, especially on full flights. She turns abruptly and joins the priority boarding line, shoulders rigid. A gate agent approaches, offering to take over Minjai's assistance. Marcus relinquishes the wheelchair handles with a polite nod, and he and Zuri step back to wait for their boarding group. She wasn't very nice, Zuri observes quietly as they watch Minji being wheeled down the jetway. Some people get stressed when traveling. Marcus offers, though his own jaw is tight. Or maybe she's having a bad day. If you're having a bad day, shouldn't you try harder to be nice so you don't give other people bad days too? Zuri reasons, adjusting her backpack straps. Marcus chuckles, ruffling her hair affectionately. That's some solid 8-year-old wisdom right there, sunshine. Maybe you should write a book. Maybe I will, Zuri says seriously. I'll call it How to Not Make Bad Days Contagious, a Scientific Approach. A boarding group is called, and as they make their way down the jetway, Marcus reviews their seating assignment. Looks like we're in 15E and F. That's a window and middle seat. Window, Zuri claims immediately. A tradition between them since her first flight at age 4. The aircraft interior is bathed in the soft blue lighting Meridian Airlines is known for, designed to reduce stress and create a calming atmosphere. Flight attendants greet passengers with professional smiles, directing them to their seats. Marcus and Zuri make their way down the aisle, Zuri counting the row numbers under her breath. 15, 15, 15. Here we are. She slides into the window seat, immediately buckling her seatbelt and pressing her face to the window to watch the ground crew loading luggage. Marcus stows their carry-ons in the overhead bin and settles into the middle seat, automatically checking that Zuri's seatbelt is properly fastened. A paternal habit she's begun to protest recently as treating me like a baby. Today, however, she's too excited by the prospect of takeoff to object. Look who is in our row, Daddy. Zuri whispers, nodding toward the aisle seat. To Marcus's surprise, Minjai is being helped into seat 15D by a flight attendant. The elderly woman settles herself with dignity, nodding a greeting to Marcus and Zuri. What a pleasant coincidence, Marcus says warmly. Looks like we'll be roommates after all, Minjai smiles. A fortunate arrangement. Your daughter will be good company. As the remaining passengers board, the cabin gradually fills with the sounds of overhead bins, closing, seatbelts, clicking, and the murmur of conversations. Marcus pulls out his tablet again, making final revisions to his presentation, while Zuri engages Minjai in conversation about San Francisco. Have you been to the Exploratorium? Zuri asks eagerly. Grandma says it's the best science museum ever, and she's been to science museums on 3 continents. Many years ago, Minjai replies, my late husband was an engineer and he loved such places. Perhaps it is time I visit again. Their conversation pauses as Diana Hargrove appears, stopping at their row and checking her boarding pass. Her face tightens when she realizes her seat is 14C, directly in front of Minjai. Perfect, she mutters under her breath, stowing her designer briefcase in the overhead compartment with sharp, efficient movements. She takes her seat without acknowledging any of them, immediately pulls out her phone and begins typing rapidly, her back rigid against the seat. The final passengers trickle in. The cabin doors close and the flight attendants begin their safety demonstration. Zuri watches with solemn attention, mouthing the instructions, along with the demonstration, having memorized them from previous flights, but understanding their importance. The aircraft pushes back from the gate, and the engine's low hum increases to a steady roar. Zuri's eyes widen with excitement as the plane begins to taxi. Her earlier nervousness about seeing her grandmother temporarily forgotten in the thrill of imminent flight. From the cockpit, Captain Richard Whitaker's voice comes over the PA system, deep and assured. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Captain Whitaker speaking. On behalf of Meridian Airlines, I welcome you aboard Flight 237 to San Francisco. Our flight time today will be approximately 4 hours and 20 minutes. We're expecting clear skies and smooth flying conditions for most of our journey, with some light turbulence as we approach the Bay Area. We're currently number 3 for takeoff, so we should be airborne in about 10 minutes. Please make sure your seatbelts are fastened and all electronic devices are in airplane mode. Thank you for choosing Meridian Airlines, where your journey matters. There's something in his voice, a genuine warmth that stands out from the usual pilot announcements that makes several passengers glance up from their devices. In seat 14C, Diana continues typing on her phone, either not hearing or choosing to ignore the instructions about airplane mode. A flight attendant approaches her smile, professional but firm. "Ma'am, we're preparing for takeoff. I'll need you to switch your device to airplane mode or power it off." Diana looks up, irritation flashing across her face. "I'm sending a crucial email. Just one moment, I'm sorry, but FAA regulations require." "Do you know how much business I bring to this airline every year as a Platinum Elite member?" Diana interrupts, her voice carrying through the nearby rows. "Thousands of dollars. I think that earns me 30 more seconds to finish this email." The flight attendant's smile doesn't waver, but her voice takes on a steelier edge. "Our elite members are indeed valuable to us, which is why we want to ensure everyone's safety. Airplane mode, please. Now." With a dramatic sigh, Diana switches her phone to airplane mode and drops it into her handbag. "Ridiculous," she mutters just loud enough to be heard, as if my iPhone is going to crash the plane. Behind her, Zuri leans toward Minjai and whispers a bit too loudly. "My dad says rules on airplanes are extra important because we're in a metal tube flying through the sky, and metal tubes in the sky need extra carefulness." Diana's shoulders stiffen, but she doesn't turn around. The aircraft moves into position on the runway, the engines powering up with a thrilling surge that vibrates through the cabin. Zuri grips the armrests, her eyes fixed on the window as the plane accelerates, pressing them back into their seats. The rumbling of wheels against concrete suddenly smooths as the aircraft lifts off the ground, falling away beneath them. "We're flying," Zuri whispers. Though it's her 4th time on an airplane, the wonder hasn't diminished. As the plane banks gently and climbs through the clouds, leaving Chicago behind, none of the passengers in rows 14 and 15 could anticipate how their lives would intertwine in the next 4 hours, or how an 8-year-old girl would challenge everything they thought they knew about courage, prejudice, and redemption. At $38,000 left, at cruising altitude, the seatbelt sign dings off, and the cabin settles into the rhythm of mid-flight routine. Flight attendants prepare beverage service. Passengers adjust reading lights and headphones, and the ambient hum of engines creates a backdrop of white noise that lulls some travelers to sleep. Marcus has his presentation open on his tablet, mouthing key phrases silently as he reviews his notes. Zuri has taken out her activity book, Brain Busters for Brilliant Kids, and is working on a complex logic puzzle, her tongue caught between her teeth in concentration. Minjai reads a paperback novel with the practiced stillness of an experienced traveler. In seat 14C, Diana has pulled out her laptop and is working with aggressive efficiency, her fingers striking the keys with percussive force. Every few minutes she sighs audibly or mutters under her breath, a performance of busyness and importance that demands acknowledgement from those around her. The beverage cart approaches from the front of the aircraft. The flight attendant, whose name tag reads Sophia, smiles as she reaches row 14. Something to drink, she offers Diana. "Sparkling water with lime," Diana responds without looking up from her screen. "No ice." Sophia prepares the drink and places it on Diana's tray table. "And for you, sir?" she asks the businessman in 14B. The card advances to row 15. Minjai requests tea. Marcus chooses coffee, and Zuri asks for apple juice in a grown-up cup, please. Not the little kid ones. As Sophia moves to the next row, Diana takes a sip of her water and grimaces. "Excuse me," she calls sharply. "This has ice in it. I specifically said no ice." Sophia turns back, her professional smile firmly in place. "I'm so sorry about that. Let me fix it for you." "Never mind," Diana says with a mouth-eyed sigh. "I'll manage. But this should be noted in my customer profile for future flights." From behind her, Minji quietly passes her untouched napkin to Diana. Perhaps this will help remove the ice she offers. Diana half turns, giving Minji a cursory glance. "That's hardly sanitary," she says, turning back without taking the napkin. Minji's hand withdraws slowly, her expression unchanged, but a subtle dimming in her eyes. Zuri, witnessing this exchange, frowns deeply. She leans across the aisle, voice earnest. "Ms. Park was just trying to help. My dad says when someone offers help, the right words are, 'Thank you, even if you don't need the help.'" Diana turns more fully this time, her gaze cooling as it settles on Zuri. "Your father should also teach you that children shouldn't interrupt adult conversations." Marcus looks up from his tablet. "Zuri, honey, let's focus on your puzzle, okay?" Zuri opens her mouth to protest, but catches her father's gentle warning look. She returns to her activity book, but her pencil remains motionless as she steals glances at Minji and Diana. The next hour passes in relative calm. The flight attendants clear beverage service. The cabin lights dim slightly to allow passengers to rest, and the steady drone of engines creates a cocoon of white noise. Marcus dozes intermittently, his presentation reviewed to the point of memorization. Zuri has abandoned her activity book in favor of looking out the window at the patchwork landscape, far below making up stories about the tiny communities they fly over. Minji excuses herself to use the lavatory, carefully navigating past Diana, who makes a show of sighing and shifting her laptop minimally to allow passage. When Minji returns a few minutes later, Diana is on a phone call, despite the onboard Wi-Fi's supposed restrictions on voice services. "I don't care what Chen said in the email," Diana says sharply into her phone, loud enough that passengers several rows away glance in her direction. "The Nakamura proposal needs revisions before I'll sign off on it. Their projections are completely unrealistic. You can't trust these people to understand how American markets work." Minji pauses in the aisle, waiting for Diana to make space for her to return to her seat. Diana continues her conversation, seemingly oblivious to Minji's presence. Her laptop and papers still spread across her tray table, partially blocking the path. After an uncomfortable moment, Marcus stands. "Excuse me," he says to Diana, his voice polite but firm. "Would you mind making room so Miss Park can return to her seat?" Diana glances up, irritation flashing across her face. She covers the phone's microphone with her hand. "I'm in the middle of an important business call. She can wait a moment." Before Marcus can respond, a flight attendant different from Sophia, his name tag reading James, appears. "Ma'am, I need to remind you that voice calls are not permitted on this flight, even with our Wi-Fi service." It's clearly stated in our in-flight guidelines. Diana's expression hardens. "This is a business emergency. I'll just be another minute." "I'm afraid I must insist," James says, his tone pleasant but unyielding. "And please make room for this passenger to return to her seat." With clear reluctance, Diana ends her call and shifts her belongings, allowing Minji to squeeze past. The elderly woman moves carefully back to her seat, her face composed but slightly flushed from standing in the aisle. "Thank you for your cooperation," James says to Diana, who responds with a tight-lipped smile that doesn't reach her eyes. As James moves away, Diana mutters under her breath, just loud enough for those in row 15 to hear. "Ridiculous. As if my conversation is the biggest problem on this flight." Minji straightens her blouse and opens her novel again, her hands perhaps trembling slightly. Zuri watches this interaction with wide, observant eyes, her gaze moving between the adults like she's putting together pieces of a puzzle. "Are you okay, Miss Park?" she asks softly. Minji nods, offering Zuri a gentle smile. "Yes, thank you for asking. Sometimes standing too long makes my legs tired, that's all. My grandma says the same thing. That's why she has a special chair in her kitchen that's taller than regular chairs, so it's easier to sit down and stand up. Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman." "She is," Zuri agrees earnestly. "She taught physics to college students for 42 years. Now she teaches me when we visit. Last time we made a potato battery together." Minji's eyes brighten with interest. "A potato battery? How fascinating. Did it work well?" as Yuri launches into a detailed explanation of her potato battery experiment, complete with hand gestures and scientific terminology that belies her 8 years. Diana shifts in her seat, the set of her shoulders, communicating clear annoyance at the conversation behind her. In the cockpit, Captain Richard Whittaker checks instruments and makes minor course adjustments. Unaware of the small dramas unfolding in the cabin, a dedicated pilot, despite his executive position, he finds peace in the act of flying, the mathematical precision, the communion with the elements, the responsibility of carrying lives safely through the sky. Today's flight was unplanned. He stepped in when the scheduled pilot called in sick and no immediate replacement was available. Rather than delay the flight, he took the controls himself, an action that would surprise many who viewed him only as a corporate figurehead. Back in the cabin, the atmosphere in rows 14 and 15 has become charged with unspoken tension. Diana works on her laptop with aggressive focus, occasionally muttering comments about the noise level just loud enough to be heard. Minjai reads her novel with outward calm, though she turns pages less frequently than before. Marcus alternates between reviewing his presentation and checking on Zuri, who has returned to her activity book but keeps glancing at Diana's rigid back with a furrowed. Approximately 2 hours into the flight, mild turbulence causes the aircraft to shudder and bump. The seatbelt sign illuminates with a soft ding, and Captain Whittaker's voice comes over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some light turbulence as we pass through a weather system. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts until we're through this rough patch. Flight attendants, please suspend service and secure the cabin." The plane dips suddenly, eliciting a few gasps from nervous passengers. Beverages slush in cups and loose items slide on tray tables. Diana's pen rolls off her paperwork and falls to the floor, coming to rest against Minjai's shoe. Minjai notices and bends to retrieve it, wincing slightly with the effort. She holds the pen out to Diana. "Your pen, Miss Hargrove." Diana turns, takes the pen without acknowledgement, and returns to her work. The plane bumps again, more forcefully this time. A can of soda tumbles from the armrest of the man seated across from Diana, spilling its contents across the aisle. "Wonderful," Diana mutters, lifting her designer handbag from the floor to protect it from the spreading liquid. Flight attendants move efficiently through the cabin, distributing napkins and addressing the minor chaos created by the turbulence. The spilled soda is quickly cleaned up, but the incident has increased the general anxiety in the cabin. A baby begins crying several rows ahead, and an elderly man asks repeatedly if this level of turbulence is normal. Zuri, however, seems fascinated rather than frightened. "Daddy," she whispers loudly. This is just like when we learned about wave patterns in science club. The air has invisible waves and we're bouncing on them like a boat on the ocean. Marcus smiles at her scientific approach to what many find frightening. "That's right, sunshine. Just atmospheric physics at work." From seat 14C, Diana sigh audibly. "Could you please keep your science lesson a bit quieter? Some of us are trying to work." Before Marcus can respond, the plane drops suddenly, causing several passengers to gasp. An overhead bin near the front of the cabin pops open, and a flight attendant rushes to secure it. The turbulence intensifies the aircraft, now bucking and swaying with greater force. Captain Whittaker's voice returns, steady and reassuring. "Folks, we've hit a bit more turbulence than anticipated. Nothing to worry about, but it might get a little bumpy for the next 10 to 15 minutes. I've turned on the fasten seatbelt sign, so please remain seated with your belts securely fastened. Flight attendants, please take your seats." Zuri clutches her father's arm, her earlier scientific interest giving way to more age-appropriate concern. "Is the plane okay, Daddy?" "Absolutely," Marcus assures her, covering her small hand with his. "Planes are built to handle turbulence much stronger than this. It's just uncomfortable, not dangerous." Minjai nods in agreement. "Your father is right. I have flown through much worse in my many years of travel. This is what do young people say, a piece of cake." Zuri giggles at hearing the colloquialism in Minjai's accented English, her tension visibly easing. "My mom used to say that too. Easy peasy lemon squeezy." A colourful expression, Minjai says with a warm smile. "I like it very much." The plane shudders again, and a loud thump comes from somewhere in the overhead bins. Diana clutches her armrests, knuckles whitening despite her attempt to appear unmoved by the turbulence. "They should have warned us about this before takeoff," she says tightly. "I would have taken a different flight." "Weather patterns change quickly," Minjai offers. "Perhaps it wasn't predicted." Diana turns slightly, her profile sharp in the cabin lighting. "I wasn't speaking to you." The bluntness of the rebuff creates an uncomfortable silence in their section of the cabin. Marcus straightens in his seat, a protective instinct flickering across his face, but Minjai shakes her head slightly, communicating that no intervention is necessary. The turbulence continues for another tense 5 minutes before gradually subsiding. Throughout the rough passage, Captain Whitaker handles the aircraft with expertise, making subtle adjustments to minimize the worst of the bumps while maintaining their course. When the seatbelt sign finally dings off, a collective sigh of relief ripples through the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Whitaker announces, "we've cleared that patch of rough air and should have smoother flying for the remainder of our journey to San Francisco. We appreciate your patience, and our flight attendants will resume beverage service shortly. We're currently about halfway to our destination, flying over eastern Colorado, with an expected arrival time of 11:30 a.m. local time." As the cabin returns to normal operations, the flight attendants emerge from their jump seats and begin checking on passengers. Sophia stops at row 15, her smile warm and genuine. "Everything all right here? Can I get anyone a fresh beverage?" "I'm fine, thank you," Minji responds. Marcus asks for water, and Zuri requests another apple juice, adding, "That was bumpy but scientifically interesting." Sophia laughs, charmed by Zuri's perspective. "That's the best attitude toward turbulence I've heard all day." Diana signals for Sophia's attention. "I'll need a sparkling water, still no ice, and something to clean my tray table. It got splashed during your scientifically interesting roller coaster ride." If Sophia is bothered by Diana's tone, she doesn't show it. "Right away, ma'am, and I'll bring extra napkins." As Sophia moves away, Diana returns to her laptop but finds it unresponsive. The battery depleted during the turbulence when she was unable to access the underseat power outlet. With an exasperated sigh, she closes the device and pulls out her phone instead, scrolling through emails with sharp, impatient movements of her thumb. The cabin settles into a post-turbulence calm conversations, resuming at a slightly higher volume as if passengers are reassuring themselves through the normalcy of human connection. Children who had been frightened now laugh as parents distract them with games or stories. Business travelers return to spreadsheets and presentations. The rhythm of flight continues, but in rows 14 and 15 the atmosphere remains charged with unspoken tension. A human turbulence that, unlike its atmospheric counterpart, shows no signs of clearing. And as the plane continues westward, crossing invisible state lines in the vast American sky, the true storm brewing aboard Flight 237 is only beginning to gather strength. The flight attendants have just completed their second beverage service when Diana Harrow's phone chimes with an incoming message. Having somehow bypassed airplane mode, she reads it with increasing agitation, her posture stiffening and her breathing becoming audibly faster. Finally, she slams her phone down on her tray table with enough force that several nearby passengers look up in alarm. "Unbelievable!" she mutters loud enough for rows 14 and 15 to hear clearly. "Absolutely unbelievable." The businessman beside her in 14B glances over cautiously. "Everything okay?" Diana gives a sharp, humorless laugh. "No, everything is not okay. My team just informed me that our biggest potential client is threatening to walk because they want changes to the proposal we spent 3 months developing. Changes that would completely undermine our strategy." She shakes her head in disgust. And guess who's behind it? Their new VP of Strategic Development, fresh off the boat from Tokyo, who thinks he understands the American market better than we do. The businessman makes a non-committal sound and returns to his magazine, clearly reluctant to engage further. Behind Diana, Minjai shifts slightly in her seat, her novel closed now in her lap. Zuri watches the back of Diana's head with undisguised curiosity, while Marcus pretends absorption in his tablet, though his posture has tensed noticeably. Diana continues, her voice rising slightly, seemingly addressing her roommate, but projecting her words backward. It's always the same with these Asian executives. They come here thinking they can just change everything to match their way of doing business, with no respect for established practices or expertise. We bend over backwards to accommodate their cultural quirks. But when we expect the same courtesy, nothing. The businessman in 14B now looks distinctly uncomfortable. Maybe you should discuss this somewhere more private. He suggests, quietly nodding toward the surrounding passengers. Why? Diana challenges. It's a free country. I'm allowed to express frustration about a business situation. She turns slightly in her seat, her gaze sweeping past Minjai with deliberate casualness before returning to her roommate. People are too sensitive these days. You can't say anything without someone claiming to be offended. In seat 15D, Minjai remains perfectly still, her face composed, but her hands now gripping her novel a little too tightly. Marcus leans toward her, voice low. Miss Park, would you like to switch seats with me? I'm happy to take the aisle. Minjai shakes her head almost imperceptibly. Thank you, but no, it is not necessary. Zuri, however, is less willing to let the situation pass. She leans forward in her seat, addressing the back of Diana's head directly. My dad says that when someone says people are too sensitive, what they usually mean is, I don't want to think about how my words affect other people. Diana turns fully now, fixing Zuri with a cold stare. Your father should teach you not to eavesdrop on adult conversations. It's rude. It's not eavesdropping when you're talking loud enough for 3 rows to hear. Zuri responds matter-of-factly. That's just regular hearing. A few muffled chuckles come from surrounding passengers, quickly silenced by Diana's sweeping glare. Marcus places a gentle hand on Zuri's shoulder. Sunshine, remember our talk about choosing the right time and place for observations. Zuri subsides, but her gaze remains fixed on Diana, unintimidated and evaluating. Diana holds the stare for a moment, then turns back to the front with a dismissive, children these days have no respect. The businessman in 14B seizes the opportunity to put on noise-cancelling headphones, effectively removing himself from the situation. Diana returns to her phone, typing with aggressive intensity, her back rigid with indignation. Minjai catches Zuri's eye and offers a small, appreciative smile. Zuri responds with an exaggerated wink that draws a silent laugh from the elderly woman. Marcus, witnessing this exchange, feels a surge of pride in his daughter's instinctive defense of others, mingled with parental concern about potential escalation. The cabin intercom chimes and Captain Whitaker's voice fills the aircraft. Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our initial descent into the San Francisco Bay Area. Local time is 10:45 a.m., and current weather conditions are partly cloudy with a temperature of 62 degrees F. We're expecting a smooth approach, but we may encounter some light chop as we descend through the coastal air layers. Flight attendants will be preparing the cabin for landing shortly. Please remain in your seats with your seatbelts fastened. We'll be on the ground in approximately 40 minutes. Thank you for your attention. The announcement momentarily breaks the tension in rows 14 and 15 as passengers adjust seats to their upright positions and stow items in preparation for landing. Sophia moves through the cabin, checking seatbelts and collecting final service items. When she reaches Diana's row, Diana stops her with an imperious gesture. Excuse me, I'd like to speak with the purser about an issue I'm having with another passenger. Sophia's professional smile doesn't waver. I'm the lead flight attendant on this flight. Can I help you with something? Diana lowers her voice, though not enough to prevent those immediately behind her from hearing. I'm uncomfortable with my seating arrangement. The passenger behind me has been making disruptive noises and comments throughout the flight, and her child has been repeatedly kicking my seat. Marcus straightens about to protest this blatant fabrication, but Minji touches his arm lightly, shaking her head in warning. Sophia glances at row 15, taking in Minji's composed posture, Marcus's evident confusion, and Zuri's indignant expression. Her eyes returned to Diana, her smile now slightly strained. I've been monitoring this section of the cabin throughout the flight. Miss Hargrove and I haven't observed any disruptive behavior from these passengers. We're preparing for landing now, so everyone needs to remain in their assigned seats. If you'd like to file a formal complaint, I can provide you with information on how to do so after we land. Diana's face flushes. Do you know who I am? I'm a Platinum Elite member with over 2 million miles on this airline. I expect better treatment than this. We value all our passengers equally. Miss Harrove Sophia responds evenly. Now please make sure your tray table is stowed and your seat back is in its upright position for landing. As Sophia moves on, Diana mutters audibly, "Unbelievable. Complete failure of customer service." The plane begins its descent in earnest, the engine's pitch changing as the aircraft loses altitude. Through the windows, the landscape below becomes more defined. The golden hills of Northern California coming into view, followed by the sparkling waters of the bay. On a clear day like today, the approach to San Francisco International Airport offers passengers a spectacular vista of the city's iconic skyline. The Golden Gate Bridge standing proud against the horizon. Zuri, momentarily distracted from the human drama by the view, presses her face to the window. "Daddy, look, I can see the bridge. And Alcatraz Grandma said we could take the boat tour if you have time after your meetings." Marcus follows her gaze, grateful for the diversion. "It's beautiful, isn't it? And yes, if the meetings go well, we'll definitely make time for Alcatraz." Minjai leans slightly to share in the view. "The city has changed so much since I first visited in 1972. The skyline grows taller every year. You were here in 1972, Zuri asks, fascinated. That's ancient history." Minjai laughs softly. "To you, perhaps. To me, it feels like yesterday. I was a young bride, and my husband was attending a conference at Berkeley. We drove across the Golden Gate Bridge in a rented Mustang convertible with the wind in our hair and Tony Bennett singing about leaving his heart in San Francisco on the radio." "That sounds romantic," Zuri sighs dreamily. "Did you dance on the bridge like in the movies?" "Not on the bridge," Minjai says, smiling at the memory. "But we danced that night at a restaurant in Chinatown where a small band was playing American and Chinese songs. My husband was a serious man, an engineer who calculated everything precisely. But that night, he danced without counting steps." From seat 14, C, Diana's voice cuts through the moment. "If you're done with the sentimental storytelling, some of us are trying to prepare for important business meetings after landing." Zuri frowns. "We're just talking about San Francisco. How does that stop you from preparing?" Diana turns her patience visibly fraying. "Listen, little girl, my name is Zuri," she interrupts firmly. "Not little girl." Deanna's eyes narrow. "Fine, Zuri. Here's a life lesson for you. The world doesn't revolve around your conversations or your feelings. Adults have real responsibilities and real problems. Your constant chatter is distracting and inappropriate." Marcus intervenes, his voice low, but with an edge of steel. "Miss Hargrove, I understand you're stressed about your business situation, but I'd appreciate it if you wouldn't speak to my daughter that way." "I'm simply explaining reality," Diana retorts. "You're doing her no favors by teaching her that everyone has to accommodate her every whim and word. And you're doing yourself no favors by treating fellow passengers with such disrespect." Marcus responds, keeping his tone measured despite his rising anger. The plane hits a pocket of turbulence, jostling everyone momentarily. The cabin lights flicker, once then stabilize. The fastened seatbelt sign illuminates with a soft ding, and Captain Whitaker's voice returns. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some light turbulence as we descend. Please ensure your seatbelts are securely fastened and all loose items are stowed. Flight attendants, prepare for landing." Diana takes this opportunity to turn away from the confrontation, making a show of checking her seatbelt and stowing her phone. The momentary pause allows tensions to cool slightly, but the atmosphere remains charged. The aircraft continues its descent, banking gently as it aligns with the runway. Through the window, Zuri watches the ground approaching with wide-eyed fascination, momentarily distracted from the unpleasant exchange. Minjai, however, sits with perfect stillness, her hands folded in her lap, her expression unreadable. There is a dignity in her posture that speaks of a lifetime of weathering storms, both literal and metaphorical, of maintaining composure in the face of discourtesy and prejudice. Marcus notices this and feels a complex mix of emotions. Admiration for Minjai's grace, pride in Zuri's instinctive sense of justice, and frustration at his own uncertainty about how to best navigate the situation without making things worse. In the cockpit, Captain Richard Whittaker focuses intently on the instrument panel, making minute adjustments as he guides the aircraft toward its final approach. A seasoned pilot with over 20,000 hours of flight time, he handles the controls with the confidence born of experience, his communication with the tower crisp and professional. Yet even as he manages the complex dance of bringing 180 tons of aircraft safely to Earth, a part of his mind registers the cabin crew's coded message about a situation in rows 14 and 15 that may require attention upon landing. As the plane descends through 10,000 ft, the city of San Francisco spreads out below like a living map, streets and buildings becoming increasingly distinct. The passengers of Flight 237 prepare for landing, each absorbed in their own thoughts and anticipations of what awaits them on the ground. None of them not Marcus with his career-defining presentation, not Zuri with her excitement about seeing her grandmother, not Minjai returning to her solitary apartment with its view of the bay, not Diana with her business frustrations, and not Captain Whittaker in the cockpit could possibly anticipate how their lives would intersect in the next 30 minutes. Or how an 8-year-old's courage would force each of them to confront truths they had long managed to avoid. The aircraft's landing gear deploys with a mechanical whir and thunk the sound reverberating through the cabin. San Francisco International Airport comes into view, runways stretching like concrete ribbons amidst the surrounding development. The plane's shadow chases it across the approaching ground, growing larger and more defined as the distance to Earth diminishes. In row 15, Zuri reaches for her father's hand, a habitual gesture during landings that she's recently deemed herself too grown up for, but that still provides comfort in moments of tension. Marcus squeezes her small fingers reassuringly, a silent communication of love and protection that transcends the cabin's discomforts. Final approach begins. The passengers of Flight 237 brace for touchdown, unaware that the most turbulent part of their journey is yet to come. The aircraft touches down with a gentle bump, and the surge of reverse thrusters' right wheels then left the nose gear settling onto the runway as Captain Whittaker executes a textbook landing. Passengers collectively exhale, some applauding the smooth arrival, a tradition that has persisted despite its fade from popularity on domestic flights. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to San Francisco International Airport, comes the flight attendant's voice over the intercom. Local time is 11:27 a.m. Please remain seated with your seat belts fastened until the aircraft has come to a complete stop at the gate and the captain has turned off the fasten seatbelt sign. Using approved electronic devices is now permitted. On behalf of Meridian Airlines and today's crew, I'd like to thank you for joining us on this flight, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. The taxiing to the gate proceeds without incident. The gentle sway of the aircraft as it navigates the tarmac, lulling some passengers into a false sense that the tensions of the flight are behind them. In row 15, Zuri has returned to staring out the window, counting the ground crew vehicles and watching the ballet of airport operations with fascination. Marcus checks his phone as it reconnects to cellular service, scrolling through messages from colleagues about the upcoming presentation. Minjai simply waits, hands folded in her lap, the model of patient dignity. In seat 14C, Diana immediately makes a call, her voice pitched to convey urgency and authority. "Jeremy, I just landed. Has Nakamura's team responded to our counteroffer? What do you mean they're waiting for a personal assurance? This isn't a social club, it's a business transaction." The plane docks at the gate with a subtle bump, the jetway extending toward the aircraft door. Captain Whittaker's voice comes over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Whittaker. We've arrived at Gate 56B. On behalf of our entire crew, I want to thank you for choosing Meridian Airlines today. We know you have choices when you fly, and we appreciate your business. We're currently showing a comfortable 68 here in San Francisco, with clear skies, perfect weather to enjoy this beautiful city. For those continuing their travels, we wish you a safe journey. For those who call the Bay Area home, welcome back. There's a warmth and sincerity in his voice that distinguishes it from the typical pilot announcement. A personal touch that doesn't go unnoticed by the passengers, several of whom comment on it as they gather their belongings. The seatbelt sign dings off, and the cabin erupts into the familiar chaos of deplaning. Overhead bins opening passengers standing despite the cramped space, the rustle of jackets being donned and bags being collected. The front cabin door opens and first-class passengers begin their exit. Diana continues her phone conversation, showing no signs of preparing to deplane, effectively blocking a row. I don't care what cultural sensitivities we're supposed to consider. The fact is, their proposal doesn't align with standard American business practices, and I'm not going to pretend it does just to avoid hurting someone's feelings. From the row behind, Min Jai winces almost imperceptibly. Marcus notices and offers a sympathetic look, keeping his voice low. People like that don't change, Miss Park. Best to just let it go. Minji nods, but Zuri, overhearing, frowns deeply. But Daddy, you always say that letting mean people be mean without saying anything is how meanness spreads. Marcus finds himself caught in the paradox of parental wisdom contradicted by adult pragmatism. Well, yes, but there's also choosing your battles wisely. Not every situation calls for confrontation. Zuri considers this, clearly unsatisfied with the answer. When does a situation call for confrontation? Then, how do you know before Marcus can formulate a response? Diana stands as the deplaning process reaches their section, still on her phone. Look, Jeremy, I'll be at the office in 30 minutes. Have the team ready with all the documentation. I'm going to personally review every line of that proposal before I let some foreign executive who doesn't understand our market dictate terms to us. As she gathers her briefcase and steps into the aisle, Diana continues, seemingly oblivious to, or perhaps deliberately ignoring the fact that Minjai can clearly hear every word. The problem with these Asian companies is they think their way is the only way. No flexibility, no understanding of American business culture. They come here, but they don't belong here if they're not willing to adapt. The words land like a physical blow. Minji's calm composure falters for the first time, a flash of hurt crossing her face before she can mask it. Marcus stiffens, his expression darkening, but before he can respond, Zuri unbuckles her seatbelt with a decisive click. "That's not true," she says loudly, standing in her seat despite her father's attempt to restrain her. "That's a mean thing to say, and it's not even right." Diana pauses, looking back at the small girl with undisguised irritation. "Excuse me. You said Asian people don't belong here if they don't adapt. But America is supposed to be for everybody. That's what my teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, says. She says, America is like a big quilt, where all the different patches make it beautiful." Several nearby passengers have paused in their preparations to deplane, attention caught by the confrontation. Diana glances around, aware of the audience, but too committed to back down. That's a nice sentiment for a classroom, but in the real world, business has established practices and expectations. When people come to this country, they need to respect our ways of doing things. Zuri stands her ground, her small frame vibrating with the intensity of her conviction. "But you weren't respecting Miss Park's ways. You were mean to her the whole flight, even though she was nice to you." Diana's gaze flicks to Minjai, who sits perfectly still, then back to Zuri. "I wasn't speaking about your friend specifically. I was having a private business conversation that you interrupted, which is incredibly rude. She doesn't belong here." The words slice through the pressurized cabin air, hitting 8-year-old Zuri Johnson like a physical blow. Her small hands clutch the armrests as the Boeing 787 Dreamliner sits at the gate. The businesswoman Diana Hargrove stands in the aisle, finger pointed accusingly at the elderly Asian woman Minjai Park, who shrinks visibly beneath the verbal assault. The flight attendants are 3 rows back too far to intervene. Adults throughout the cabin avert their eyes, headphones suddenly fascinating magazines, suddenly gripping reads. But not Zuri. She stands all 311 of her shoulders squared beneath her bright yellow sweater, her braided hair adorned with colorful beads that click softly as she steps into the aisle. My grandma taught me that when someone is being mean, staying quiet is the same as helping them be mean. She announces her voice clear and steady, despite its childish pitch. And nobody on this plane should help meanness fly. Diana's mouth falls open. Minji's eyes widen in shock and something like wonder. And in the front of the aircraft, alerted by the flight attendant's hurried call about a disturbance, Captain Richard Whittaker emerges from the cockpit, still wearing his uniform, with the 4 gold stripes on each sleeve, his silver hair catching the cabin lights as he makes his way down the aisle toward the commotion. The cabin has gone silent, the usual post-landing bustle frozen as passengers watch the tableau. A towering businesswoman, an elderly Asian lady, a protective father, a determined child, and now the commanding presence of the captain approaching from the front. What seems to be the problem here? Captain Whittaker asks, his deep voice carrying natural authority without aggression. His eyes scan the situation, taking in Diana's defensive posture, Minji's discomfort, Marcus's protective stance behind his daughter, and Zuri's unwavering determination. Diana turns ready to present her version of events, her voice taking on a smoothly professional tone that contrasts sharply with her previous comments. Captain, I was simply trying to deplane when this child began yelling at me about a private business conversation I was having. Her father seems unable to control her behavior. Captain Whittaker looks down at Zuri, his expression neutral but not unkind. Is that what happened? Young lady Zuri meets his gaze directly. No, sir, Ms. Hargrove said that Asian people don't belong in America if they don't do things the American way. She was mean to Miss Park the whole flight, and then she said that awful thing, and nobody was saying anything. So I did. The captain's eyes shift to Minji, who meets his gaze with quiet dignity. Ma'am, would you care to comment? Minji hesitates, clearly uncomfortable being the center of attention. The young girl is kind to be concerned, but it is not necessary to make a scene. I'm accustomed to such attitudes, but you shouldn't have to be. Zuri insists, her voice cracking slightly with emotion. Nobody should get used to people being mean to them because of where they're from or what they look like. A murmur of agreement ripples through the watching passengers. Diana glances around, realizing that public opinion is shifting against her. Her face hardens. This is ridiculous. I'm a Platinum Elite member with this airline, and I'm being publicly humiliated over a misunderstanding. I want this noted in my customer profile, Captain. Captain Whittaker considers her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, to everyone's surprise, he removes his pilot's cap and holds it against his chest, a gesture of surprising vulnerability from a man in command. Miss Hargrove, he begins, his voice now pitched to carry to the surrounding rows. I believe introductions are in order. My name is Richard Whittaker, and in addition to being your captain today, I'm also the Chief Executive Officer of Meridian Airlines. A ripple of surprise moves through the cabin. Diana's eyes widen slightly, her posture shifting as she recalibrates her approach to this unexpected revelation. Surprised, she begins, but Captain Whittaker holds up a hand. As CEO, I have the privilege of setting the values and culture of this company. One of our core values is respect for every individual who flies with us, regardless of their national origin, race, age, or status. His gaze moves to Minji. Ma'am, on behalf of Meridian Airlines, I sincerely apologize for any discomfort or disrespect you experienced on our flight today. Minji nods a small, gracious acknowledgement. Captain Whittaker turns back to Diana. Miss Hargrove, your Platinum Elite status tells me you've spent many hours with our airline and we value your business. But I want to be clear. What I value even more is maintaining an environment where every passenger feels welcomed and respected. Oz is letting his words sink in. I also want to acknowledge this young lady. He continues, looking at Zuri with unmistakable admiration. It takes remarkable courage to stand up for others, especially when adults around you remain silent. That kind of moral clarity is something we adults would do well to remember. Zuri straightens a little under his praise, though her expression remains solemn. "Now," Captain Whitaker says, addressing the whole area, "I believe we can all deplane civilly. Margraveve, if you'd like to discuss this matter further, my office will be available to you. Miss Park, please allow us to assist you with your connection or ground transportation as a small gesture of apology." He turns to Marcus and Zuri. "Mr. Johnson, you should be very proud of your daughter and young lady. Thank you for reminding us all what courage looks like." With that, he steps back, allowing the deplaning process to resume, though the atmosphere has been fundamentally altered. Diana, facing the collective judgment of her fellow passengers, exits quickly, her earlier bravado diminished. As she passes several people who had been silent during her comments, now give her disapproving looks or pointedly move aside. Minjai rises slowly, gathering her small handbag. As she prepares to exit, she pauses beside Zuri, who still stands in the aisle with her father's hand on her shoulder. The elderly woman bends slightly, meeting the child at eye level. "Thank you, Zuri Johnson," she says softly. "You remind me of my granddaughter. She too has a brave heart." From her bag, she removes a small carved wooden charm in the shape of a tiger. "In my culture, the tiger represents courage and protection against evil. I have carried this for many years now. I think it should belong to you." She places the charm in Zuri's palm, closing the girl's fingers around it with her weathered hand. Zuri looks down at the gift, then back up at Minjai, her eyes bright with emotion. "Thank you. I'll keep it forever." As Minjai moves toward the exit assisted by a flight attendant, Captain Whitaker personally ensures her safe passage through the cabin. Passengers who had been silent during Diana's comments now offer Minjai smiles and nods of respect, small gestures of atonement for their earlier inaction. Marcus and Zuri are among the last to deplane. As they pass the cockpit, Captain Whitaker stands at the door saying farewell to passengers. He stops them with a gentle gesture. "Mr. Johnson, if you wouldn't mind, I'd appreciate a moment of your time before you leave the gate area." "Nothing concerning, quite the opposite." Marcus nods, curious. "Of course, Captain." As they exit the aircraft and step into the terminal, Zuri clutches her new tiger charm in one hand and her father's fingers in the other. Bright California sunshine streams through the terminal windows, illuminating their path forward. Behind them, Flight 237 already prepares for its next journey, but the impact of what transpired within its pressurized cabin continues to reverberate in the lives of those who shared that finite slice of sky. In the quiet moment before they meet with the captain, Marcus kneels down to his daughter's level. His expression a complex mixture of pride, love, and something like wonder. "Zuri Johnson," he says softly. "Your mother would be so proud of you today." Zuri clutches the tiger charm tighter, her eyes bright with unshed tears and the certainty of having done the right thing. "Do you think Grandma will be proud too?" Marcus smiles, brushing a beat-adorned braid from his daughter's face. "I know she will. In fact, I think your Grandma June is going to say you're just like your mum, the strongest woman she ever knew." Hand in hand, they walk toward the gate desk where Captain Whitaker waits, his silver hair catching the sunlight. His presence a reminder that sometimes authority can align with justice, and that courage can come from the most unexpected sources. Even an 8-year-old girl who refused to let meanness fly. 3 months later, on a warm summer evening in San Francisco, the boardroom of Meridian Airlines West Coast headquarters buzzes with anticipation. Floor-to-ceiling windows offer a panoramic view of the sunset painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. The Golden Gate Bridge silhouetted against the fading light. Around the polished mahogany table sit the company's executives and board members, along with a few special guests. At the head of the table stands Richard Whitaker, no longer in his pilot's uniform, but dressed in a tailored suit that does nothing to diminish his commanding presence. "Ladies and gentlemen," he begins, his deep voice filling the room. "Thank you for joining us for this special announcement. As you know, Meridian Airlines has always strived to be more than just a way to get from point A to point B. We aim to connect people, cultures, and communities with respect and dignity. He gestures to a display board covered by a cloth. Today, I'm proud to unveil our new company-wide initiative inspired by an extraordinary encounter I witnessed 3 months ago on Flight 237 from Chicago to San Francisco. With a dramatic flourish, he removes the cloth, revealing a poster with a striking image, a stylized airplane silhouette with a rainbow of diverse human figures holding hands across its wings. Across the top in bold letters reads the slogan, "Courage has wings. The Zuri Johnson Initiative for Inclusive Skies." A burst of applause fills the room. Seated near the front, Marcus Johnson beams with pride as his daughter Zuri dressed in a yellow dress that matches her original sweater. From that fateful flight stares at the poster in wide-eyed amazement. The Zuri Johnson Initiative, Whitaker continues, will implement mandatory diversity and inclusion training for all Meridian staff, establish a zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory behavior on our flights, and create a scholarship program for young people who demonstrate exceptional moral courage in standing up for others. He turns to Zuri, his expression softening. "Young lady, your actions that day reminded everyone on that plane, myself included, that courage isn't about physical strength or social status. It's about doing what's right, even when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult." Zuri, unusually solemn for an 8-year-old, nods her understanding. The wooden tiger charm Minjai gave her hangs on a simple cord around her neck. As part of this initiative, Whitaker continues, "We've established a $50,000 college scholarship in your name to be awarded annually to a student who demonstrates similar moral courage, and we've created a new position within our company, Director of Passenger Dignity and Inclusion, which I'm pleased to announce will be filled by none other than Minjai Park." From her seat beside Zuri, Minjai rises, acknowledging the applause with a graceful nod. In the 3 months since Flight 237, a remarkable friendship has blossomed between her and the Johnson family. What began as weekly visits evolved into Minjai becoming something of an honorary grandmother to Zuri, their bond transcending age, culture, and background. "Thank you, Captain Whitaker," Minji says, her voice soft but carrying the weight of wisdom. "In my 73 years, I have experienced many kindnesses and many cruelties. I witnessed from young Zuri was not simply kindness, but justice, a recognition that silence in the face of prejudice is its own form of complicity." She turns to address the room more broadly. "In my new role, I hope to ensure that every passenger who flies with Meridian feels the respect and dignity they deserve, regardless of where they come from or what language they speak. The skies belong to everyone, and so should the comfort and safety of air travel." Another round of applause follows her words. Marcus squeezes his daughter's hand, his career having taken an unexpected but welcome turn after that flight. The financial technology firm where he'd been struggling for advancement had been impressed by the media coverage of his daughter's story and his own grace under pressure. 2 weeks after the incident, they'd offered him a position leading their new West Coast division, a substantial promotion that allowed the Johnsons to relocate permanently to San Francisco, closer to Grandma Margin, and now to Minjai as well. As the formal presentation concludes and the reception begins, Zuri finds herself approached by a familiar but unexpected face, Diana Harrove. The businesswoman looks different somehow, less rigid, though no less polished. "Hello, Zuri," Diana says, her voice lacking its former sharp edge. "I'm not sure if you remember me." "I remember you," Zuri replies simply, neither accusatory nor particularly warm. Diana nods, accepting this response. "That's fair. I've been doing a lot of thinking since our flight together. A lot of uncomfortable thinking." She glances toward Minjai, who is engaged in conversation across the room. "I wanted to tell you that you were right that day, and I was wrong. Very wrong." Zuri studies the woman's face with the unfiltered directness of childhood. "Did you apologize to Miss Park?" "I did," Diana confirms. "It wasn't an easy conversation, but it was an important one. She's quite remarkable, much more forgiving than I probably deserved." "Forgiveness is free," Zuri says, quoting one of her grandmother's favorite sayings, "but change costs effort." Diana blinks momentarily, taken back by the wisdom from such a young source. Then she smiles, a genuine smile that transforms her face. Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman, and she's absolutely right. She hesitates, then adds, I've been working with a diversity consultant at my company, learning things I should have known long ago. It's humbling. Across the room, Marcus watches this exchange with cautious optimism. Beside him, Captain Whitaker observes as well, a knowing expression on his face. Remarkable, isn't it, Whitaker comments. How sometimes the most powerful lessons come from the most unexpected teachers. Marcus nods. Zuri has always had that gift, seeing through to the heart of things. Her mother was the same way. His voice catches slightly on the mention of Amara. The pain of loss still present, though no longer raw. I understand your company's West Coast expansion is going well, Whitaker says, tactfully changing the subject. Better than expected, Marcus confirms. Turns out there was a significant market gap we hadn't fully appreciated until we were here on the ground. Sometimes a change of perspective is exactly what we need. Whitaker muses, watching as Zuri now introduces Diana to her grandmother June, who has joined them with her characteristic academic's curiosity about this new acquaintance. As the evening progresses, the gathering takes on the warm glow of genuine human connection. Barriers of age, culture, and initial prejudice continue to dissolve in the alchemy of shared experience and open hearts. Business cards are exchanged. Genuine laughter rings out, and the seeds of unexpected collaborations are planted. When it's time to leave, Zuri finds herself in the center of a group photo with Captain Whitaker Minjai, her father, grandmother, and somewhat surprisingly, Diana. As camera flashes capture the moment, Zuri's hand instinctively reaches for the wooden tiger charm around her neck. A tangible reminder of how a single act of courage can create ripples that extend far beyond one moment, one flight, one encounter. Outside the Meridian headquarters, the San Francisco night has fully descended. The city lights twinkling like earthbound stars. As the Johnson family walks toward their car, Zuri skipping slightly ahead, Marcus glances back at the illuminated building where his daughter's name now adorns a corporate initiative. The improbability of it all strikes him anew. Penny for your thoughts, Grandma Jun says, linking her arm through his. Marcus smiles, watching Zuri examine a night-blooming flower with characteristic curiosity. I was just thinking about how life takes the most unexpected turns. 3 months ago, we were just visiting. Now we live here. You're teaching part-time again. Zuri has a scholarship fund named after her, and I'm actually enjoying my job for the first time in years. And all because my granddaughter refused to let someone be unkind to a stranger on an airplane. June adds, pride evident in her voice. She gets that from her mother, Marcus says softly. June squeezes his arm. She gets it from both of you, son. Never doubt that. Ahead of them, Zuri has paused beneath a streetlight, her face tilted upward to study the moths dancing around the light. The beads in her braids catch the glow, creating a halo effect around her small, determined profile. In that moment, she seems both entirely childlike and somehow ageless, a perfect synthesis of innocence and wisdom. Daddy, Grandma? She calls, pointing upward. Look at all the airplanes. Indeed, high above the city streets, the twinkling lights of aircraft move across the night sky in measured procession, each carrying hundreds of lives, hundreds of stories to destinations near and far. Among those distant travelers, perhaps there is another Zuri, another Minjai, another Diana. Souls whose paths will cross in the finite space of a journey, with the infinite potential for transformation that human connection always carries. Marcus and June join Zuri under the streetlight, all three gazing upward at the aerial parade. Around Zuri's neck, the wooden tiger gleams softly, a reminder that courage like the aircraft above has wings, and that sometimes the most powerful journeys are not measured in miles, but in the distance between who we were and who we choose to become. If you've enjoyed this story about courage, connection, and standing up for what's right, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and leave a comment sharing your thoughts. Where are you watching from? Has a child ever taught you an important lesson about bravery, or treating others with dignity. Your support helps us continue bringing these meaningful narratives to viewers everywhere. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the skies and into the heart of what makes us truly human.